And welcome to the Virginia. Good morning and welcome to the Virginia Association of School Social Workers, Tidewater Regional Conference. The focus, a whole new world, meeting the challenge, will be addressed by our keynote speaker and a diverse group of professionals from around the region. My name is David Walter Sr., and I will be your moderator for. Before we begin, we have greetings from Dr. Linnell Gibson, Chief of Schools for Norfolk Public Schools, Dr. Dennis Moore, Senior Director of Student Wellness for Norfolk Public Schools, Dr. Devonna Fulton, Provost of Norfolk State University, and Dr. Elizabeth Dungy Anderson, Interim Dean of the Eplin R. Strong School of Social Work.
The sound is off. David and Charmaine, the sound is off for the video.
Greetings, school social workers from across the region. It is an honor to welcome you to the 2021 Virginia Association of School Social Workers Regional Conference. On behalf of all the social workers in Norfolk Public Schools and our superintendent, Dr. Sharon Birdsong, I trust that you will have a wonderful learning experience here in our great city. Please know that the calling you live is filled with constantly changing circumstances, but you are fully equipped to meet the challenges and support the needs of our communities, our families, and most of all, our children. You are that behind the scenes hero, that person who makes sure human crisis, though overwhelming, can be survived. You help families deal with the secrets, the pain, and the other human issues that others may not see. Your efforts make a positive difference in the lives of others. Welcome and enjoy the 2021 Fall Tidewater Regional Conference for the Virginia Association of Social Workers.
Looks like we're having technical difficulties. So Dr. Devonna Fulton, Provost of Norfolk State University, can give her remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walter. And I want to thank everyone for joining us and I'm really very glad to be here. It's a pleasure to share greetings on behalf of Norfolk State University and welcome you to the 2021 Virginia Association of School Social Workers and the Tidewater Regional Conference, Fall 2021. School Social Workers Conference. I want to thank Dr. Dolores Dungy Anderson, Interim Dean of the Ethelyn R. Strong School of Social Work at Norfolk State University, and Dr. Val Jean Livingston, Dr. Kirsten Erickson, Dr. Sandra Williamson-Ashe, and all the Norfolk Public Schools administrators and faculty and staff for organizing and hosting this event. Norfolk State University recently celebrated the inauguration of our 7th president, Dr. Javon Adams Gaston. One of the many exciting things happening here on campus. We're particularly excited about our ongoing relationships in the community, such as the strong collaboration with Norfolk Public Schools. To all of you in attendance today, thank you for your dedication to the students. We know these are challenging times, and your support to students helps them thrive in their academic achievements and to become successful despite the challenges they encounter. We're also grateful for your preparation of students seeking higher education like Norfolk State University. Not only does Norfolk Public Schools prepare the students within the public schools, NSU appreciates your willingness to shape, educate, and guide future professional school social workers through internship experiences. Recently, we have seen many challenges, and it is indeed a whole new world. But the collaboration we see here today is an example of how working together creates positive outcomes. The collaboration between Norfolk Public Schools and Norfolk State University to provide this quality conference today demonstrates the commitment to enhance students' success and face the challenges together. We are meeting the challenge together. Enjoy the program.
Thank you, Dr. Folsom.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Dr. Dungy Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm having some technical difficulties in getting in. But anyhow, I would like to follow Dr. Fulton and say that it is truly a pleasure for this meeting today, simply because when we can come together and work together, be inclusive and collaborative and equal as human beings, it's always good news and good feelings. We have our own diversities, but coming together is really just a wonderful thing that it can happen. And I certainly would like to say that the School of Social Work, the FNR Strong School of Social Work, is extremely pleased to have this collaborative joint conference today. And I also have noted that one of our esteemed faculty members, Dr. Sandra Williamson-Ashe, is going to be our keynote speaker. So I certainly would like to say to you that you're in for a treat. And I also would like to say that we need to do this again, because we have a lot of challenges, but it does not mean that we can't come together and be the best we can be. So truly welcome from the FNR Strong School of Social Work about this collaborative venture. Thank you.
Thank you all for those wonderful remarks. To introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to present Ms. Ramita Gant of Norfolk Public Schools.
Good morning. I will be presenting to you Dr. Sandra Williamson-Ashe. She's a tenured associate professor in the FNR Strong School of Social Work at Norfolk State University, where she has also received her MSW. with a doctorate in higher education, administration, and leadership from the George Washington University. She has served in several senior level university administrative positions, assistant to the director of the Virginia Beach Higher Education Center, associate vice president for student affairs, and vice president for enrollment management and student affairs. As a proponent of leadership, she has published several book chapters on leadership, as well as peer-reviewed articles to improve collegiate andragogy, group work, ethics, student success, and redefining the inequities of women. Featured books and articles include in the Routledge Handbook of Social Work Ethics and Values. Her article is entitled An Integrated Principle Approach of International School Social Work Ethical Principles and Servant Leadership Principles. The book, The Intersectionality of Women's Lives and Resistance, has her article, A Distinct Set of Characteristics for Black Women at an HBCU, Tortured by Slavery, Shaped by Intersectionality, Liberated into Other Mothering. And most recently this year, the book Millennial Leadership in Law Schools, Essays on Disruption, Innovation, and the Future contains her article, Millennial Leadership Advanced Through Empathy Education. Dr. Williamson-Ashe has previously served as Commonwealth of Virginia gubernatorial appointment to the Council on Aging and a Virginia Beach mayoral appointment to the E-Government Commission. This past year, she served on the Chesapeake Public Schools Social Emotional Learning Advisory Council. She is a professional recipient of the American Council on Education, Noreen Bailey Spencer Scholarship for the Women's Network Virginia, and an honorary member of the Golden Key International Honor Society. Most recently, Dr. Williamson-Ashe developed a course for baccalaureate for baccalaureate social work students that addresses the neglected professionalism, empathy, and leadership needed for current day college graduates, entitled Professional Development, Leadership, and Social Work Ethics. During her presentation, if you have any questions, please utilize the Q&A section. And now I present to you and introduce to others, Dr. Sandra Williamson-Ashe. Thank you.
I need to be able to screen share, please. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Mrs. Gant, for the introduction. Trying to get my screen right. It's okay. So I humbly appreciate this invitation and the opportunity to share with the coordinators of this program, Norfolk Public Schools and Norfolk State University, my university family, for this fall conference for the Virginia Association of School Social Workers, across the best region, Tidewater Regional Conference. As I get started here, because of our current day crisis, I did want to take one moment. If you would please, just in your own mindset, give some time and thought to those victims who were recently massacred, for lack of any sympathetic word, in the grocery store shooting, our children who have been assaulted at bus stops and inside the school buildings, our military personnel who have been killed defending our society, our EMS and first responders who have been victims of just protecting us, as well as victims of the pandemic and other illnesses that have taken place in our society. So I certainly hope that you would give them some thought at this moment, and their families, as well as some of us who have lost members of our society and have not had the opportunity to grieve in the normal way that we would grieve. Thank you for that. Before I begin, I want to offer a minimal disclaimer, okay? My intention for this presentation, I do have to move my screen a little bit. Oh, it won't stay. Okay. I don't want to repeat to you anything that you already know. It's not to challenge anything, your skills, your tenacity, your creativity, your patience required for you to complete your job. You all are professionals and experts in your own right. I'm a pretty eclectic positioner, and so I oftentimes reframe the obvious and just tilt the table a little, not for complete makeovers, but just to add a little food for thought and a few more angles for reflection. This will be brief, so let's get started. This year, the School Social Work Association of America will again partner with the National Association of Social Workers to launch a public awareness campaign that increases public knowledge of the value of school social workers and what they bring to schools, students, families, and communities. And they will encourage school districts to hire more school social workers. Well, I know that's pleasing to you all, and you all, like me, a former school social worker, cannot imagine that you can actually have enough workers that are needed. This is an international effort that's very intentional. I've seen other countries are also doing the same thing based on our current day challenges. You can see some of the areas I will be referencing in this presentation on the slide that highlight where we might focus our intentions. We'll begin with recognizing how we are accustomed to socializing, our history of social integration, what we fight so hard not to do, and a few theoretical inclusions that include the politeness theory, unlearning, and maybe even an opportunity to plate our meal. As you all know, socialization is our primary form of association. Learned first in our familial settings, teaching us norms, values, and societal behaviors. Within socialization, social integration refers to those attachments that individuals sustain within larger society. Typically, it's measured in terms of occupational, organizational, and community roles. This is important in our understanding and how we responded to our most recent disruption of our society. So one reason that our conference is entitled A Whole New World is because the world seems different than it did before. That's actually change. Social workers being the gurus of change, and all those here in the social sciences and helping fields understand that change is not only inevitable, it is necessary. There may be a term that EMS or other medical professionals here are familiar called autophagy. It's a term that actually refers to the human body cleansing and regenerating new cells. That's something that must happen in order for us to sustain life. It may just be that our nation has done the very same thing. The term community is indiscriminately used for social integration for what is perceived as interest groups. So the term community implies a group of people, a quality of relationship, or a place in a location. These groups may be based on race, ethnicity, religion, politics, interest, individual attributes, or almost any other characteristic. And as we use the term in social work, community implies commonality of purpose. We heard our provost at Norfolk State University and our dean for the School of Social Work mentioned that commonality of purpose. And it can be in opposition to other groups at times. I will highlight for you, though, that community is not purely a Eurocentric term. Many great thinkers remind us that community is a necessary condition for the realization of human social goals. So to understand some or why individuals have responded in this manner, I'll mention some of the cultural influences for communities. The importance of communities has been discussed by philosophical luminaries such as Socrates, Plato, mentioning that human flourishing and community was essential for well-being. Aristotle even said that for a person to survive outside of a human community, they are not human anymore. They are reminiscent of an animal. Here we have the ancient world of Africa. In this world, the viewpoint on community involves a relationship that exists between the individual and community. Africans believe that it is only in the community where the life of the individual acquires true meaning. In other words, it's not in living in an isolated being or just being by yourself, but mutually interacting with other members of the community, that the individual can ever hope to realize his social aspirations in life. A common saying in Africa, which holds as follows: a man is a man because of others, and a life is when you are together. Alone, you are an animal. In ancient Roman society, the family was the nucleus and formed the basis of every community. Stable families made for stable communities and were the most important component of a strict hierarchy based on gender, citizenship, ancestry, and census rank. In ancient Egypt, everyone had something to contribute to the community. All skills were considered essential. So there was the inclusion before we decided to call it inclusion. So as an Egyptian, if you were living in a balanced life, you would enjoy full life. Just as importantly, you would contribute to the joy and success of your community, and by extension, your country would be joyful. Community was the result of knowing your place in the universe, including expectations, and this provided the social structure and the community of civilization. In Native American communities, people tell legends, folk tales, and fables. They do these storytellings for many reasons. They want to recount the history of the people. They want to tell where they came from, their strengths, their lineage, and particular heroism. And as you can quite imagine, storytelling took place as a gathering of people in one space called a community. But our abrupt social isolation that was induced by the safety protocols of the pandemic disrupted our sense of community. All of these communities as well as our own community, start with the individual. The practice of social work, whether in an agency or the school system, requires we begin with the individual. The individual makes up the community. There is a theory called the politeness theory. This theory notes that all humans want to be appreciated and protected. So if you consider the politeness theory, you can understand the repercussions of the pandemic. Feeling unprotected and vulnerable, this is exactly how the pandemic began to wreak havoc over our daily lives, leaving all of us to feel uncertain, confused, bewildered, and frankly, a little lost. We had daily appointments with the news to determine if our community's COVID numbers had increased, hospitalizations had increased, deaths, and we had state updates to find out whether or not there were new or more restrictive protocols in place. We were masking, Zooming, homeschooling, Zooming, isolated, and Zooming. The abruptness of the adjustments for social isolation are unprecedented, yes. But this sharp, uncomfortable, and painful dislocation for everything, practice and consistent with how we had our everyday lives, left a host of feelings that now must be lived in accordance with the return to the actual before. All of the effects of the pandemic residuals affect the individual, and individuals formulate relationships that create communities. The most important one is the relationship you have with yourself. This is the one most often neglected and needs the investment of self. Here you can see a slide for improving your relationship with yourself that you can read. Most, I want to highlight practicing self-compassion. The pandemic not only played mischief with our daily routines and left people and communities feeling desolate, it also forced a bird's eye view of the workforces that serve as primary crisis responders. We began to refer to them as heroes, though this is the service they have always provided on a daily basis, pre-pandemic and in any other societal crisis. Sometimes in our before, we were moving at such a rapid and congested pace, we limited our ability to see the world around us. And we know the superheroes lie in social workers. At this time, if you would take your phones out and present it to the QR code, there is a video attached that you can watch at your leisure. The video is actually of Sophia having a temper tantrum because she doesn't want to go to school. The reason why I associated the video with this slide is because the previous slide showed organization, people masking, being cooperative. But in most households, there was some elevated levels of chaos, even if that chaos was periodically organized chaos. Sleeping schedules were non-existent. Timeouts were actually for the parents, not the children. And to try to petition for screen time restrictions was foreign. That was a complete joke. But also dinner time became an actual together time. TV streaming and movies was actually a family event, and outdoor time with fresh air and moments to garden was an all-for-one occasion. The restricted environments of the pandemic were intensified by the occurrences of our so-called modern day society. And I am saying modern day society because that would imply that we remain freshened, up to date, maybe even mature. But we started this conversation referencing the cultures that our Western civilization borrowed from these communities of ancient times that we strive to now show pride in. This dismantling that some saw as surprising and an extended ill of the pandemic was actually what we as social workers see all the time in our regimented working environment. The plagues of our society as we know it. Anytime there's a disruption in the balance of our society, marginalized populations will be inadvertently, disproportionately, negatively affected. This is not new, and it's not surprising, particularly not to marginalized populations and social scientists. But it is a byproduct of the neglect when society treats ills with a Band-Aid instead of an institutionalized systemic repair. Change agents, which we are as social workers, we are also a value-based ethical profession. Social workers are very introspective and understand not only our own personal values, but the personal values and values of systems that are out there without judgment. The predominant values in our pandemic era are individualism and communitarianism. So individualism considers, of course, that individuals are most important and nothing else is. They do exactly what is best for themselves. Now, communitarianism looks at the interests of the social unit. That is usually social workers. And it's important at this particular venue that individuals should suppress their individual wishes and desires and do what is best for the community. Those surprised by the Asian butcher hate crimes and recurrent slaughter of Blacks by demented police officers were like all of us, fed through the communication lines of social media and public television. So why was there a heightened sense of fight and not acceptance? That was your commercial break. In social work, there is a theory known as conflict theory. This theory states that there is a conflict between those who control society's structures and those who are controlled and exploited by them. And when we study this in reference to social problems, we see that these problems lie in the structures of society and not at the fault of the individual. The repair for these areas exists in unlearning, creating a dialogue and listening. This takes maturity. People have to tether their defenses and listen. It's okay and acceptable for people of color, Asian, Latinos, Blacks, Pacific Islanders, to feel proud and voice admiration of their ancestry and culture and its worth and value without hatred or dissension. So why is this an important part of this discussion in the pandemic? Because of the residuals such as mental health and challenges and job loss and death of loved ones and vaccination phobia and mistrust. Children and parents have not been isolated from the social climate just like we haven't. And neither the teachers, administrators, or any social workers that live and serve in their communities and schools. The atmosphere of the community affects the residents. There is not a fence of protection, just like it wasn't for COVID. So take note of the language used: butchered Asians, slaughtered Blacks. In our community, comfort zones, when we tend to speak emotionally charged, and when we present here, we use a different, diverse tone. However, with the professionals here, I know you will understand that these challenges will meet you at the front door. So you'll be challenged to look for the learning in the language. These communities and cultures felt attacked and not accepted, embarrassed and not embraced, disregarded, not desired, resented and not respected. This dismissiveness is how they feel. This is what you will have to respond to as we readmit our social connections in the school and in the community. I played this particularly because this is a song written by Sam Cooke, who was motivated by the speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King. And he felt that it was a song that could give people hope. However, this song was written in 1963. We are still at the point where we need this kind of a message. Meeting the challenge with intention. We can begin doing this with unlearning that I mentioned earlier. It's an often overlooked tool that's needed for the advancement of cultural harmony and acceptance. And unlearning is a process where you can disregard something from your memory. And when you unlearn something, you forget it, you put it aside, you lose knowledge of it. Why would you want to unlearn something? Because you can get rid of a bad habit, a misconception, a preconception, or something that is false. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Unlearning fosters a sense of willingness to pursue the unfamiliar and learn from the opposite, including making you more curious, because we're in a constant sense of fluctuation and transformation. So unlearning helps you come out of this shell of knowledge and then gain more knowledge for the environment. You can vacate some space. This changes literally your synaptic connections all over your brain, learning new information. So just as new information that we deem important can change our thinking and our beliefs, we can also change habits or working memories using the same tools. Perception is everything. So what looks good here? Do you eat everything that you're served? Well, this looks remarkably enticing. And yes, I probably did venture along the lines of what I like the most. So let me change a little bit your visuals and ask you again, do you eat whatever you're served? Did you change your mind? Now, who doesn't want a little bit of frozen chowder on a stick or a raspberry iced donut with sprinkles and pork and beans for filling? Well, you probably wouldn't really accept these meals if they were served to you. So this kind of means that you have a filter that you can use, and you can use that filter in other areas. We don't have to accept the information and terminology that's used to reduce the humanity of others and restrict them to stereotype judgments that become permanent hurdles in their personal lives and in policies. We have a choice of how and what we want to ingest or reject. As social workers, this is an ongoing process and exercise for us, that we have the resiliency to reject and our lens of our perception through ethics. So let me share with you how you can plate your cognitive thoughts, your language, and your actions. Remove the vulnerabilities, the phobias, and the mistrust, and alter your intention of thoughts. So our plate, our choice. Let's be intentional We have been challenged with inconsistencies and rapid changes, frustrated, lack of control, but you're not obligated to see things the way they are actually delivered. You don't have to accept the languages or describe people and situations the way others do. You can intentionally create your own dialogue and descriptors. Decide what you want, decide what you'd like to ingest, how much, and then conscientiously, with intention, make your own plate. Everything you perform with intention and incorporate the value of communitarianism improves your outlook on life. So think with communitarianism. Use a process of protection and admiration with the community being centralized, because do what is best for the community. In an African community, is referred to as kinship. See the humanity and see the humanity of others as well as in yourself. Focus on qualities that are similar to you and others, and immediately the thoughts of how much you are doing or giving shows maturity and an enormous amount of restraint. But you're going to practice this muscle of control and discipline, not only in your thoughts, but in your tongue. Change the narrative. A negative is a word or phrase that shows that you reject or disagree with something, and we use it so freely oftentimes. In linguistics and grammar, affirmation and negation are the ways that grammar encodes negative and positive polarity in verbs and phrases. Grief often accompanies change because of the unknown, and fear can dictate our actions. This too would require that we're best at changing the narrative. So you must become then familiar and comfortable with your increase. Now that you have intentionally unlearned areas and made room for constructive thoughts, you've decided to see the humanity and change the narrative with intention. Don't be offended if it's not seen positively by others, but get comfortable with your adjusted level. See your horizons broaden so that you allow yourself to feel a new sense of empowerment. This is your new world. Have courage. Embrace newness and the unfamiliar with zeal and optimism. The alterated imposed by yourself and the pandemic does not have to be where you stop and stare with fear and discomfort. Find your place of comfort in the discomfort. Now let's see what your plate looks like. So you have an attitude of communitarianism that provides unification. It allows for inclusivity and decision-making that promotes safety and justice. And now there's a completeness in communitarianism. So with humanity, you've just used your politeness theory for everyone to be appreciated and protected. And in your work or your family environments, just remain encouraging to one another. Don't forget yourself in the process. You must encourage yourself. Consider kindness your superpower, social workers. Changing the narrative, you've made an adjustment in the mind. Remember that I've mentioned you're not obligated to accept what is given. If we decide to perceive the languages and stereotypes, the biases and the angers differently, we change the narrative. And only individuals can cognitively make those adjustments with their intentional perception. So to sustain these areas by seeing your horizons broaden, remember I told you to use this, have courage. This is your new world. And remember to find your place of comfort in the discomfort. So my family of social workers, the fact is we have always been meeting the challenge. Look at your everyday practice. It's unprecedented only in that we have not been here before, but change and crisis has been. Thank you.
Good morning, all, and I am Van Mitchell. I am your chat monitor. I always wanted to be a monitor. Nobody would let me when I was growing up, but I'm 50 years old now, so I finally got the chance. Thank you for those words, Dr. Sandra Williamson-Ashe as well. And I would be remiss if I did not look at the chat and I said, behold. I saw that throughout the chat. And I think everybody else should know the rest. But we did have a question from Tracy Knight. What are your thoughts regarding the debate surrounding critical race theory?
I believe that we are a society accustomed to neglect. We oftentimes do not invoke proactiveness. We are very reactive. So I believe, of course, from an Afrocentric perspective, which I do wholeheartedly believe in, that critical race theory is an opportunity for us to be able to acknowledge the impact that race has had on our systems and the impact that it has on our thinking as a society. We know pretty much as social workers that it's ingrained in our policies and programs. I think that we should not let up on that narrative. We should continue to push. It's easier for people to change when they're in a process of change. It's difficult for people to embrace change when they're at a stoplight. So I think it's critical that we continue to introduce that, even though it's not a very accepted format that is used in our society. I hope that answers and adds some thought to critical race theory.
Thank you. Another question from Tracy as well. Why do you think the social justice movement exploded during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, a little bit of what I showed you was, of course, the isolation and people feeling very disconnected as a community, and then seeing something happen in reference to the lives that seem to be taken as lack of value. Then the explosion of mistrust with those who were our helpers in society. And I think the combination, if you remember some years ago, there was this perfect storm called Sandy Storm. So there was this perfect storm that was platformed in this particular time frame. And people were not hypersensitive, as I have heard, but people were extremely aware, sitting in your rooms watching newscast after newscast when you're already losing members of your community and family to a pandemic, and then looking at other areas and seeing where there was immediate and close separation, that your life was not valued. No one cared. And that's how the perception is in the household. So I think that is why there was at least the baseline established for that kind of explosion at one time. And if you look at how our society gears itself historically, we have waves, just like Sam Cooke, 1963. So every 30 years, we continue to do this turnabout. And I think that that's a part of that, particularly with the generation that we have now. Our Zers and our millennials are not people who just sit down. They are a little bit more reactive in terms of protesting.
Thank you. Another question, what are your thoughts about the immigration crisis, particularly as it relates to Haitian deportation?
That is quite the question. As I looked at that this morning, we do oftentimes in our nation have this different concept of who is acceptable to walk or come into the country and who is not. If you have enough money in a different country than America, you can fly over. You will be accepted. If you have brown skin and you are running away from a lifestyle that does not help you sustain life, it then becomes crisis. I don't think we have a handle on it by any means. I don't think past presidents did either. I don't think that we need to chase people with horses. I don't think we need to shoot people across a wall to keep them from coming over. I think we need to develop a policy that's holistic and reasonable and sustainable, because we have not only people evading their countries because of our climate change, we have people evading their countries because of the violence. And then the climate change is not going to go away. We cannot go to other countries and control how they dictate their policies. So we have to have something that's sustainable and embracing. You have to actually look at the Constitution of the United States of America and see what it says and abide by that Constitution. If we can continue to do things in our country that are unproductive for the people that are actually here, then we should be doing something productive for people that want to be here. I hope that answers somewhat.
Thank you. Many of us are dealing with behavior concerns with students coming back to school within the first couple of weeks. And you did mention in the presentation about socialization. Can you speak on how maybe we can possibly give some tips to teachers and also we can use for our students coming back to this new normal that we're dealing with now?
Yes, and I know teachers are not, particularly K through 12, are not comfortable in just engaging in a lot of conversations that are off of the curriculum sheet. But we all, universities and K through 12, nobody has been protected or isolated. So just as in the change slide I mentioned, you can ignore it, but it's still there. So I'm not particularly sure if they were talking university or K through 12, but for our students, it will be important to acknowledge what they are actually experiencing and going through. I don't think ignoring that does anything. It may even help them kind of lift something off of their plate. And that has to be representative, of course, of what grade level you're talking about. You cannot have that kind of open dialogue with someone in the first grade that you would have in the 10th grade. So you have to be mindful of the cognitive abilities of whom you're speaking with. But you can also speak very generally. Are there some things that frighten you? Are there some things that you are uncertain about? And have an open conversation. Now, for university levels, I have as well had those conversations in the initial parts of starting the semester, because my students have been extremely impacted by that. You know, I have a field class of 17 students, and 3 of my students have lost their parents in the last 4 months, 1 last week. That's extremely difficult to find your focus in class and you just lost your father. So those things don't go away. So my tip would be to have the conversation, sometimes even taking them out in the hallway and having the conversations, giving them an opportunity to, even in my class, write something that they would like to read to the class or share with the class, and vice versa. As a result of my class learning how many people had lost their parents, they started a group chat amongst themselves to kind of help support one another. So I think you have to read it, and I think we're going to have to keep doing that, because we're not at a point where anything has ended. We are continuing in the pandemic era.
And I know we're about to wrap up, but can you speak a little more on the politeness piece that you gave?
Sure. So the politeness theory kind of gives us a foundation where we're all in the same space. You know, there may be some folks that are outside of that social integration space where they don't understand exactly what's expected of them in society, and they don't have an idea of those norms and behaviors. But overall, the masses of us live in this particular politeness bubble that says, I want to be appreciated and I want people to value me. And however that is demonstrated can be very individualized. Some people want to be acknowledged publicly and patted on the back. Some people just don't want you to put a knee on the neck, and they don't have to see you or know you. They just want that. So the politeness theory really gives you a foundational basis that says that we all kind of want this same thing. We want to be appreciated and protected in our lives. And when we live outside of that circle of politeness, then we become dismantled from the inside out. And either we recognize it and begin to build ourselves back up. Social workers are really good at self-talk. Or we then start to kind of fizzle a little bit, and we become a little bit angry and more defensive and then fearful after all of that. And that politeness theory just kind of puts us in a light where we can kind of say, we all do kind of want the same thing. We just want to be appreciated, and we want to feel protected. We don't want to feel vulnerable all the time. And that's kind of where the pandemic and our society of explosiveness has left us.
I think we have time for one last question. This is from, how do you think this is from Mercedes Santos Bell. How do you think social workers and LPCs can work together to support students, schools, and our communities?
Well, there's not enough of either one. That's first. Collaboration, I don't know how we can work without collaboration. So I have a hard time even thinking that. But in our school systems, we used to have this hard line where there was absolutely no counseling that took place. And our FAP teams had this pocket, that they dealt with every week that's now, so compounded. So I do believe that there is a collaborative point at which LPCs and social workers and counselors need to get together. And that is actually aside from the instructors and the administrators, because many of those administrative teams don't have exposure to all the fields, and they base their decisions and policies and information on one area. So I think it takes the social scientists and the counselors and the LPCs to get together in their own collaborative bubble, because they know their own expertise and they know and understand the job abilities and performances of the other disciplines. And I think that would be the first thing that would help to do that, because there's more than enough work for everyone. We just have to create that kind of pie situation where we're divided, but we're not isolated and we don't have barriers. We have some broken lines, but we all have a responsible duty so that we can basically holistically take care of those social emotional parts that are necessary for our students.
And Dr. Williamson-Ashe, you have a host of superlatives in the chat, but do you have any closing remarks before we go to break?
I do not. I don't want to take up any additional time, but I certainly do want to encourage everyone to have some self-compassion. We are a very driven and individualistic society. However, just remember that you have value and worth. And if no one else sees that, see that in yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williamson-Ashe, for that wonderful presentation and those insightful responses. At this time, we are going to take a small break. But before we go, Ms. Oge Edwards of Norfolk Public Schools will be awarding our first set of door prizes. Following the prizes, a presentation introducing our panelists will also be playing.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in our virtual conference. I have drawn the names of pre-selected registrants who will receive gift cards. These individuals receive $10 gift cards to Jersey Mike's. Okay, here we go. Paige Sorrell, Nicole Buckley, Elisa Lewis. Once again, Paige Sorrell, Nicole Buckley, Elisa Lewis. Congratulations to our winners. Your gift cards will be mailed to you within the coming days at your preferred address. You will be contacted via email for mailing information. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Time is now 10:02. We will resume promptly at 10:15. Enjoy your break.